All right. Well, today we are wrapping up a series called Naughty or Nice. Naughty or Nice. And if you haven't been with us before, my name's Lou. I'm one of the pastors here. We usually take our teachings at this point in the service and we group them together in what we call a series. So today we're wrapping up a series, but don't worry, I'll bring you up to speed real quick. So basically this series, what we're doing is kind of ripping off the whole song, Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Specifically, the part in the song where they say, he knows if you're sleeping, he knows if you're awake, he knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for good. All right, pretty good for 8:30, all right? So be good for goodness, especially a cold morning, 8:30. Be good for goodness sake, right? Now, really, the question is there more to it than that? Like being good for the sake of goodness. You know, this abstract idea of doing good or doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. Is that really the motive? Is that really what's at stake? Is that really what's on the line when you and I are trying to decide whether or not to be naughty or nice? Whether or not to do the right thing or the wrong thing, whether or not to be good or bad. I don't know about you, but the whole idea of doing something for the sake of goodness, it doesn't really hold much weight. It's not all that compelling, especially when doing something for the sake of badness is a lot more appealing in that moment. And so we're trying to get to the heart of what's behind all of this doing good and being good and the right thing, especially when it comes to God. And when this translates into the world of church and religion and obedience and the idea of listening to a God, right? Like, why would you do that? Is it for his sake? Is it for the sake of goodness? Or is there something else at play here? At the heart of this series, and really at the heart of understanding this whole concept, is understanding the idea of sin. Sin. A lot of times we use the word sin simply to talk about things that we think like God doesn't like, you know, things that you should be ashamed of, things you feel guilty about, like you sinned, you colored outside the lines, you broke one of God's rules, and so now you're not being good, right? We use that word to describe when we do something that we think God's not in favor of. And while there's some truth to that, like God's not in favor of these things, the idea is not just because sin is wrong, you know, and like the grand list of things that are right and wrong. If you and I believe that sin is simply wrong, then it doesn't hold all that much weight. But if you understand sin to be not just wrong, but way worse than that, like toxic, something that poisons you. Not necessarily something that's going to kill you physically, though it can, but something that is like eroding the things in your life that you love, the things in your life that's good, something that's jeopardizing the things that we treasure and value, the things that really matter. When Jesus talked about God, he talked about him more than anything else as a father who cares for his children. So is sin wrong? Like, well, yes, the same way it's wrong for a child to play in traffic. But is it dangerous? Is it going to like hurt that child? If you understand God as a father and understand sin to be something that takes away, that hurts, that breaks down things that are good, then that in itself can totally transform the way you understand God and church and faith and religion and Jesus. We said at the end of week 1, we said God is not concerned about your grade, he's concerned about your good. Like he is a father who is deeply invested in the well-being and the flourishing of the people that he loves so much. And so if you get nothing else out of this series, it's the idea that sin, whether you believe in Jesus or not, but when you hear sin, don't think wrong. Think toxic. Think poison. So over the past few weeks, we've been going through individual sins. On the second week of the series, Tom talked about envy and where that leads and what that does to us and how it's not just pointless, it's not just ineffective, but it's toxic. how envy ruins the things in life that are good. Last week, we talked about pride, how pride is not just arrogance, but it's this idea that it's my job to defend, my job to present the case for who I am and what I'm worth. Pride, we looked at C.S. Lewis's definition. Pride he calls ruthless, sleepless, unsmiling concentration on the self. And it's exhausting. It takes the joy out of doing things in life because all things become me presenting the argument for me, for who I am and what I'm worth. And so God tells us to watch out for these things, not because they're wrong, but because they're toxic. The thing that we're talking about today is another one of those things. It's another one of those toxins. It's something that we often don't address by name, or at least I don't when I see it in myself. It's something that our culture really doesn't address all that much, but it's something that has the ability to radically transform the way that we trust God. It's countercultural, like embracing this thing or seeing this thing as a toxin. And I would argue that it's the easiest toxin to act on. And when I say easiest, I don't mean that it's like actually easy to do, but the way to act on it, the way to do something about it is so unbelievably practical and concrete. You can act on it even if you're not feeling it on the inside. So I'll tell you a story to kind of like set this up for you. When I was in pre-K, or maybe even younger, like I don't even remember this. This is one of those stories my parents have told to me repeatedly because I was so young I don't remember. But there was this activity in school where the teacher asked us to draw a picture of what we would ask for if we could have anything we wanted. So I had this little like thing. Apparently I had to draw a picture or express like, if I could have one thing, this is what I would want. And my answer was, as a little kid in pre-K, preschool, my answer was a bucket of teeth. Bucket of teeth, right? Now, understandably, the adults in my life inquired, like, hey, child, what's the deal with the bucket of teeth? And what I expressed to them was that at the time, it's not this way anymore, but at the time I had a pretty sweet arrangement with the tooth fairy where I put a tooth under my pillow and I woke up and there was money the next morning. So I thought, man, if I had a bucket of teeth just all day, every day, cashing in every morning when I wake up, right? Now, I don't know what that tells you about me as a child, like why I didn't just go straight for the money. You know, why not a bucket of cash? Maybe I wanted it to be a magical experience. I don't know. But here's what's interesting. I was so young, I don't even remember the story. Like, I don't even remember actually saying that. But even at such a young age, I still believed that more was better. If I had more money, things would be better. I was in preschool. I didn't have a wallet. I didn't have stress. I wasn't worried about how I was going to pay the bills, right? It wasn't like I had grown-up problems, but I still, as a child, believed that more was better. Have you ever found yourself saying this, like some form of this? Once I have, then I'll be. All right, like once I have more in the bank, like then I'll be able to rest. Once I have more coming in, then I'll be happy. Like once I have more in retirement, then I'll be able to stop worrying. Once I have, then I'll be. You ever found yourself saying that? Like the good life, the idea of being happy and resting and not striving and not worrying, like it's out there. And once I have more to some extent or another, well, then I'll be able to truly experience that. You know the term like the life, you ever people talk about the life, like on TV, it'll be like, you know, something goes really well or someone's on a tropical island and they're like, this is the life, you know? Or like now, like the current generation will say like your best life or the good life. It's all the same concept. And what's amazing about that concept is that 2,000 years ago, Jesus was talking about the same thing. And people who were around during the time Jesus was around, they talked about the same thing, and they used a very similar term, life, or life more abundantly, or life to the full. There's this concept that there is a life that's better, that's attainable, and it's out there. The issue, though, was people often had very different ideas about how to get there. And today, in the time we have left, what we're going to look at is something Jesus says about the life and its connection to more. Because more is not always bad, but it's also not always good. So Jesus is teaching this big crowd. And at this point in his life, Jesus is wildly famous. There are people, like literally thousands of people coming out to listen to him. Luke writes that at a certain point, people were trampling over each other just to get to him. And so he's teaching, he's saying all these things that are blowing people's minds. He's doing things that are blowing people's minds. And eventually, one day, as he's teaching these thousands of people, somebody gets to the front of the line. And they manage to get his attention. And here's what happens. It says, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Now, I don't know what the system was for getting to Jesus, Like, I don't know how they decided, okay, you get to speak next. But Jesus was doing crazy things. He was healing people. He was answering these profound questions, right? And this one guy gets to the front of the line, and he's come to tattle. Like I always saw this as kind of petty. Like, really? You're going to use your minute with Jesus, like the man himself? There's thousands. You're at the front and you're like, can you just tell my brother to give me some of the money? Right? Why? He's not asking for money. He's not asking for a bucket of teeth. He's asking for his issue to be settled. I always thought this was kind of petty. And so Jesus replies, he's like, man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Like, why are you bringing this to me? This is not an issue for me to solve. But then he says something interesting. And I imagine the brother wasn't all that thrilled about this. He says, watch out. Be on guard. Like, be careful. He doesn't say watch out for people who want to take advantage of you. He doesn't say watch out for older brothers who aren't going to give you your inheritance. He doesn't say watch out for people who are going to rob you. He says be on guard, watch out against all kinds of greed. Greed. Now, greed is not a thing. I don't know if you're like me. Greed is not a thing I don't like to name in my own life. Right? We look at greed as this really sinister thing. And so a lot of us think do I have a problem with greed? I don't know, maybe. This word though, greed, to look at what's at the heart of it, to understand what's going on, it's a compound word in the ancient language, and it's the word to have and more. The idea is having more. And that's definitely something that I can connect with a little easier than the idea of greed. Right? What Jesus is saying is, watch out. Be on guard against all kinds of having more. Watch out. There are passages where Jesus talks about the damaging effects of greed on a society, like how my greed messes up things with other people in my life. But this is not what he's talking about here. What he's talking about here is how my greed damages my life. The toxic effects of greed on the person with the greed. The damaging effects of having more and pursuing more on the person who is in the pursuit, not the other people who are affected by it. And here's why. Here's the thesis. Here's the point. Here's the thing that he's going to highlight in yellow, the thing he doesn't want people to forget, the reason why you have to be careful against all kinds of having more. He says, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. The life to the full, life filled with meaning, the thing out there you and I are all looking for, the place we want to arrive at. It does not consist in an abundance of possessions. The answer to life is not more. He's not saying more is bad. He's not saying stuff is bad. He's saying if you're looking for life, if you're looking for the thing that's going to make you feel like this is a life worth living, and you're on the path to more, just know more does not equal the life. That's not where that road ends. And so many of us live as if that's where life, like that's where the life is, on the path to more. But the two, they're different roads. Or at least we can say the road to more does not lead to life. You know, the human race, like as smart as we are, right? We are amazingly poor when it comes to predicting what's actually going to make us happy. Right? And you know this, I know this, right? There's the thing that you want, whatever it is. Maybe you want to be with someone, then you're actually with that someone, and you think they're going to make you happy, right? And they kind of do, you know? But maybe it wasn't all it's cracked up to be. You know, or there's a job that you want so badly, and you're like, well, once I have, then I'll be. You know, once I'm there, then I'll be happy. And you get there, and you got the job, and you're like, okay. Like, it's nice, right? There's a study done in 1978 by Northwestern University in Illinois. And what they did was they tracked 22 people who won the lottery to see how happy they were after a year. And at the same time, they tracked 22 people who had been in an accident so bad that it had taken away their ability to walk for the rest of their lives. They were bound to a wheelchair their entire lives. After 1 year, do you know which group was happier? Neither. They were the same. Initially, there was a spike in both groups. There was a spike of joy with the group that won the lottery. And there was a spike of sadness in the group that had the accident. But by 1 year, both of them had made it back to equilibrium where they were. Right? I don't know about you, but that is just mind-blowing to me. Like, if you think that more will lead you to the life, it's a mistake. It's a mistake. And what's amazing is that a lot of us, like, we know that, and we've heard that, but it doesn't, like, sink in. And I think the same was true for the people that Jesus was talking to. And so he gives them a story. Like, all right, you all agree. Well, look at it like this. And he tells them a parable, which is a story with a lesson. He says this. He says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest, all right? So this is a fake person. This didn't actually happen, but Jesus is presenting a case. The ground, okay, so one, the guy owns land. He's in a good place financially if he owns land. He's rich, so we know he owns land and he's already got a lot. And then his land yielded an abundant harvest. He's got more, and more is on the way. What Jesus is doing is setting up a situation. He's like, okay, here's a guy who has everything you've ever wanted, right? This is the guy that invested in Apple in 1980. This is the person who has so much. He thought to himself, this is the life. Nope. He thought, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. If you're in the crowd listening to this made-up story that Jesus is telling you, like, are you serious? Like, you've got a problem? You know, like, this is an issue for you? You're worried because you've got ground, you're rich, you've got an abundant harvest, and you've got so much stuff, you don't know where to put it. Like, really, you have an issue? And he says, I know, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be married. See what he's saying? He's saying, once I have, then I'll be. Right? He's already got what everybody wants, but he's still saying, once I have, then I'll be. Like he says, like, once I have bigger barns, I have a place to keep my crops, then I'll say to myself, you have plenty stored up for many years, so take life easy. The word is literally rest. He's saying, then I'll be able to stop worrying. Then I'll be able to stop being so concerned about what I'm going to do with my life. Eat, drink, and be merry. The word is be happy. He's saying once I have more, then I'll be able to stop worrying and be happy. You ever said that? Ever felt that way? Once I have, then I'll be happy and free of worry. This is the reality of greed. And everyone listening sees this. Greed, it's never satisfied. Meaning the guy has what everyone wants, but he doesn't see it. He's already at more. He's at more, he's getting more, but he still needs more because he's worried. What Jesus is not saying here, and this is what's important, what he's not saying here is that it's bad to save. Right? He's also not saying it's bad to have stuff or to have a lot of stuff. In fact, Paul wrote a letter to Timothy where he told Timothy, tell people who have a lot to be generous with that. He doesn't say tell people who have a lot that they're wrong and they shouldn't have a lot. The idea in this passage is that if you think life, more is going to lead you to life, that's where you're mistaken. He has what he's looking for and he doesn't realize it because he's distracted by what he's looking for. You ever put your sunglasses on the top of your head and you're like, where are my sunglasses? That's what this guy's doing. He's got what he's looking for, but he's distracted. He doesn't realize it because of what he's looking for. It's never satisfied. The other thing is that, or we'll keep going. In this story, then God jumps in. And God is the only other character in this story. And you have to read this the right way. It says, God said to him, you fool. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then, who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Now, this is one of those situations, this is a great verse. You know why? Because if you see God as this angry punisher who's just ready to pummel people who step out of line, then you're hearing that in the way that you read this. But that's not what Jesus is communicating. A fool in the ancient world, it wasn't so much of an insult as it was a matter of fact. He's saying you have knowledge, but you're not acting on it. You already have what you're looking for, but you're living as if you need more, right? So he's not insulting him here. And then he says, this very night your life will be demanded from you. He's not saying, I'm gonna kill you because you are building bigger barns. He's saying, at some point, all of us are gonna run out of time. At some point, all of us are gonna come to the end of our lives. And it's at that moment, or close to that moment, when we'll realize if we invested ourselves in other people, in who will get what you have prepared for yourself, or if we've been storing everything up for ourselves. And here's what Jesus says. Here's how Jesus concludes. He says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God. Meaning, this is how it will be. He's using an expression there. To be rich toward God is to be generous. He's saying, for the person who spends their life on the hamster wheel of more, trying to accumulate more and more and more and more and more, there will be a point where they feel like, I could have given so much more. I could have invested in so many others. There was so much potential here, and now, who will get what you've prepared for yourself? There will be a feeling of regret. That's what he's talking about here. In other words, he's saying greed will never allow you to rest. You'll never feel like you actually got there, even though he continued to accumulate more and more and more and more. He never actually felt like he had the life. And it's because he stored all of it up for himself. The point Jesus is making to these people is one, that greed is a restless journey of dissatisfaction. It's a restless journey. It's like a hamster wheel. Restless. He's got it all and he's still worried. And at the end, he's never satisfied. But the other idea behind this is that the impact of your life will be measured by what you give, not by what you gain. Let me say it this way, you will measure the impact of your life by what you give, not by what you gain. When you're not here anymore, the impact of your life will be spoken of in terms of what you've given, not by what you gain. In this profession, doing what I do, I see people at the end of their lives. And what nobody cares about is the amount of money they're making at the end of their lives. Nobody cares. What they do talk about is the people they've invested in. What they do care about is what they have given to, who they have given to. If you spend time at funerals, what you realize, if you look for trends, what you realize, what everyone celebrates about the person is what they gave. No one's like, my dad just had this ability to make so much money and he had so much when he died. You and I will measure the impact of our lives based on what we give, not what we gain. So then there's this next part of the story. Jesus isn't done here, though. He's talking to a crowd. Remember the scene. He's talking to a crowd. There's thousands. But then he turns to his disciples. Like, in other words, he's announcing to everyone, and then there's a break in the story, and Jesus turns to his disciples. Not like the group of people who have decided to live their lives following him. The group of people who are trying to grow their trust in God. The group of people that's already on board with the stuff that he's teaching. It's like Jesus has a message to the masses, like, hey, everybody, you will measure your life based on the impact of your life, based on what you give, not on what you gain. But then he turns and he takes things a little further with his disciples who are trying to learn how to trust God. And here's what he says. This is going to be a rant, and you should read it yourself because it's a lot in a short amount of time. But there's so much here, and there's one big idea at the end of it. So here's what he says. Ready? We're going to go fast. It says, Jesus said to his disciples, he turns around, looks at them, and he says, therefore, if that's true, in light of all that, he says, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life, remember life? Remember? Like the idea of life? Like life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. He says, life is more. It's more than food. And the body is more than clothes. He's inviting them to live for more. He says, consider the ravens. Like, look at the birds. They don't sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. Remember that. And how much more valuable are you than birds? He says, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Then he gives them another example. He says, consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon, that was an ancient Jewish king with a lot of money. He says, Solomon in all his splendor was not dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes, remember that, God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you'll eat or drink. He's talking about priorities. Like, don't make that the thing that you're living for. Don't worry about it. For the pagan world runs after such things, and your Father knows that you need them. The pagan world, he's not insulting the rest of the world. He's talking about people who don't believe that there's a God who is a provider. He's saying they run after those things because they don't believe someone clothes them and feeds them. They do not believe that they have a provider, so they have to set their hearts on those things. But he says, but you seek first his kingdom. Seek his kingdom. And these things will be given to you as well. His kingdom, if you were with us like a few months ago when we talked about the whole idea of your kingdom come, your will be done, the idea is to seek the good of other people. He's saying invest in other people. Care about other people. Don't make your thing the pursuit of more. And then he comforts them again. He says, don't be afraid, little flock, for your Father, God, has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that do not wear out. A treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. He says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now I know that there's a lot there, and you should go back and read it. It's Luke chapter 12. There's a lot there to sit with and think about. But the main idea here is two things. One, he's saying, live for more. Like, live for something greater than simply providing for yourself. Live for more than having more. Why? Because the impact of your life will be measured by what you give, not by what you gain. So he's inviting them. He's like, sell your stuff. Give stuff away. be a generous person, because those are the things he says, persons that will not wear out. You will never regret an act of generosity ever, ever. And so live for something more. Why? Why? And here's the part. Here's why he turns to his disciples who already have a faith of their own. Because God will give you what you need to be generous. God will give you what you need to be generous. In other words, the framework of this whole thing, the argument Jesus is presenting, the way that God works through people, God wants to show the world that he's generous. And he does that by being the provider and the supplier of people who trust him and then choose to be generous. Like, God gives through the generosity of people who trust him. That's the framework of all of this. People see that God is generous when they see the generosity of people who have chosen to trust God as their supplier. And so he turns to his disciples, to those following him, and he's like, look, like, you have a supplier. You know that. Not because you've earned it, but because you believe this. And so go live for more. Embrace this. Be a generous person. God will give you what you need to be generous. God shows himself to be generous to the world through the generosity of his people. He's saying to teach generosity by modeling it. If you were with us early in the beginning of the service, we were talking about the 12 days of Christmas. The 12 days of Christmas is something that we do as a church where we go out and we buy things from local stores, right? Shops in the village. We pay for them. Then we ask the shop owners to hold on to those things until it's their day in the 12 days leading up to Christmas. We'll announce it, that people will come and they'll claim those things that we paid for, right? And so it's a win-win-win for everybody. It's a win for the shop owners because they're getting business coming to their place and they don't have to pay for it. It's a win for the people who get the free stuff because they go in, they get free stuff. And it's a win for us because we have the opportunity to teach generosity by modeling it. We show that we believe we have a provider by being generous. Some of you have asked questions like, where does this money come from? You know, like there's this idea that the church has all of this money, you know. There's a back room where Scrooge McDuck does his like dive into the... No, like there is not extra money. But because we value this, because this is what we believe, we budget in the beginning of every year to give away 10% of everything that comes into this church. It goes right back out because this is what we value as a church. This is what you're part of if you're part of this church. Showing people that we believe we have a supplier. We believe we have a provider. And you know what's amazing? It works. The person who runs the 12 days of Christmas right now at our church first heard about our church 5 years ago because of the 12 days of Christmas. She had never been involved in a church before, heard about it, started coming to the church, joined the team, got baptized, got more and more involved. Now she runs the 12 days of Christmas. It's because of the statement that the 12 days of Christmas first made to her. This is how it works. And what's amazing is that you have seen God to be generous because of your involvement here in the church. If this church has changed the way that you think about God at all, it's because there are people here who invest in this church. In other words, you've changed the way that you think about God because people in this community have been generous. Like they have invested in that mission. That's how word gets out, when people are generous. Just to like pull back the curtain a little bit, right? And if you ever have any questions about how church finances work, please come talk to me. But I've spoken to some of you about how you think church finances work. Somebody came up to me once when the church started growing and was like, wow, you must be doing so well. You must be making so much money now that the church is growing. Or like if there's a big donation, some people think like the people here just get that money. And I was like, oh my gosh, no. One, we're a 501c3, meaning we're a nonprofit organization. We have a board. That board set my salary, and it has nothing to do with the attendance at the church. It has nothing to do with how much money comes in as a church. We're a nonprofit organization, and we're supported by the people here. We don't have some like distant outside, like source of money that just continues to come in. There are people here who have decided to set aside a percentage of their income because they believe and trust in what the church is doing. And that's how the impact has been made here in the community. It works. When people are generous, an impact is made in the community. These are the things in life, like these acts of generosity. These are the things that we will look back on with joy and pride. These are the things that we'll celebrate. I'm not talking specifically about giving to the church, especially if this isn't your church or you don't trust the church or you think maybe we're like out to get your money, right? There's a lot of people in this community that think the church is just in it for the money. If you think that, you should never give to the church. But give to some place that you're grateful for. Give to some place that you do trust, because generosity is something that you'll look back on with pride, that you'll celebrate. I have a friend who made it a goal to give away $10,000. Like that was a goal of his. Not a goal of how much he could gain, but of how much he could give. Another friend who had a goal to give away a vehicle. Like one day I want to be in a place where I could give away a vehicle. And he's been able to accomplish that goal. Like these are the things that he looks back on with pride. The things in your life that you'll celebrate are the radical acts of generosity. The way that you invest in other people. You will never, ever regret that. And so, from a very practical standpoint, there's really two ways that we can learn to be generous. When I was in 3rd or 4th grade, I think I've told you this story before, but when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, I had a holiday boutique, right, where you get a little envelope, and my parents filled the envelope with money, and I took it to the holiday boutique, and they were like, all right, take this money and spend it on the people in your family, right? Like buy gifts for other people. And so they gave me an envelope, and I got to the holiday boutique. And when I got there, right away, it wasn't fair. Right away, I saw this little basketball figure, like right in the opening, and I was like, I need that. So I bought it. Then I continued to like go through the boutique. I saw this little like pencil holder. It was a dinosaur with a big open mouth. You put the pencil in the mouth, and I was like, I don't have a place to keep my pencil. So I bought that too, and I went through. I bought a few other things, and then time was up. And I realized I had purchased nothing for anyone but myself. And that was a moment, honestly, I was sad. My parents were not happy, but I was sad. Like I ran out of time, I realized I had spent it all on myself. You know what I've realized since then? Life, especially if you're a follower of Jesus, life is like the holiday boutique. What Jesus is saying in this whole passage is like, you have a God who is your supplier, and he's given you something and said, go, like make an impact. Go spend this on other people. I'll take care of you. Don't worry, but go and be generous. And what I don't want is for there to be a moment where like my time is up and I look back and realize I spent it all on myself. So there's two things that you can do that I would challenge you to do, especially if you're a follower of Jesus. If you want to be generous, one, you plan to be generous. In other words, like when you make a decision about where your money is going, if you have a budget to be generous. Make a decision, maybe it's a percentage of your income where you decide this is going out. This is going to make sure, this is a guardrail, this is my way of watching out and being on guard from all kinds of wanting more, having more. And so you make a decision at the beginning of the month to give, and give to what you believe in and what you support. So for some people, that's the church. For other people, especially if you don't trust the church, like I said before, make it someplace else. This is what Allie and I do. This is what we teach our kids to do, because we want to show them that you are not just made to spend everything on yourself. Plan to be generous. The other thing is to train to be generous. And this is a little harder. But there are ways that you can teach yourself to look to be spontaneously generous. To be the person in the moment that is quick to lend a helping hand. That is quick to give in the moment. Who develops an instinct of generosity. And so for that, we want to give you an opportunity to do that today. We've done this before, but I'm going to ask the ushers to come forward. We're going to give you some envelopes. We normally don't pass things around here. If we have the host with the buckets, get him ready in the back. We want to give you an opportunity to be spontaneously generous and to train yourself to be spontaneously generous. So these buckets are going around, and when you get one, you could take an envelope and put it down at the end of your row. But inside the envelope, there's $10. And we want you to take this envelope and bring it with you wherever you go. So for me, I keep my envelope on the dashboard of my car, or I'll keep it in my backpack. But keep it in a place where you're gonna see it on a regular basis. And what's so great about this is that you're ready in the moment to be spontaneously generous. And we've set you up with the first $10, right? Like that's on us. We're teaching generosity by modeling it. But from there, once you do that, then you fill it. After that, put in the next $10 bill and teach yourself to be spontaneously generous. Maybe you add $10 to the tip at your next meal. Maybe you pay for the drink in the person behind you at the drive-thru. But take this, put it someplace where you're gonna see it, and know you'll always be ready to be generous. This is a way that you can train yourself, that you can watch out, be on guard against all kinds of having more. Be the kind of people who've learned to be generous. I'm gonna ask the band to come back up here. We're just about out of time. We're definitely out of time. But just think for a second. Just think for a second. Like this church, we've grown to a decent size. There's several hundreds of us now. Can you imagine, like in one community, if this 1 week, like somewhere around 1,000 people looked for an opportunity to give away $10? It's only $10, but I promise you that the $10 that you give away will mean more to you than the next $10 that you spend. You'll remember it. It'll make an impact. And when hundreds of people do this all at the same time, this is where we get a glimpse of what Jesus meant when he said, "You are the light of the world." We have the opportunity to be generous.